Ross discovered that his wife, Phoebe, was cheating on him with a wealthy businessman named Adam. But that was only the beginning of the game. When he tried to expose her, evidence surfaced that could destroy not only his marriage but his entire life. Adam wasn't just a rival. He was the brother of Mark Langton, the man whose career Ross had once ruined. And now, they had come for his life. There's something unusually twisted hidden in this story. Can you figure it out? Ross stood in the dim light of his office, holding a mobile phone in his hands. His fingers trembled as he reread the message. A simple text, just a few words, "Thank you for last night." It was unforgettable. He didn't recognize the number. This wasn't his phone. It was Phoebe's phone. All day, Phoebe had seemed distant, but he had dismissed it as fatigue. She had been working for a new client for the past 2 months, a wealthy businessman named Adam, who had hired her to care for his 2 children. Ross didn't understand why Phoebe had taken the job, especially since their financial situation was stable, but she had explained that she was bored staying at home. "Ross, will you be working late today?" she had asked that morning, twirling her car keys in her hand. "Yeah, I have a meeting with a client," he replied, sipping his coffee. "Are you staying overnight at Adam's again?" "Maybe." He asked for help with some evening event. "I told you about it," she said, looking away. That word, staying, it unsettled him. Phoebe had stayed over at her client's place several times, explaining that the children needed her at night. But this time, something in her voice sounded different. He set the phone down and walked to the window. Their suburban home had always felt like a safe haven, a retreat from the world. But now, that feeling was gone. Ross felt as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff. Maybe it's just my imagination, he thought, trying to regain control. But something in his mind wouldn't let go. That evening, Ross came home earlier than usual. He had canceled his meeting on purpose, to find out more. The keys clicked softly in the lock as he stepped into the dark house. "Phoebe," he called, but the only response was the low hum of the refrigerator. He walked into the kitchen and saw her phone on the table. She had forgotten it at home. Ross had always respected her privacy, but this time, something stopped his hand as he was about to walk away. The phone vibrated. A message from the same unknown number. "See you tomorrow at 8. Just a little more time, and we can change everything." His heart froze. He stood motionless for a moment, then resolutely unlocked the phone. The most recent messages were from Adam. "You're always so caring. You make my home feel warm. I don't know what I'd do without you." Ross swallowed hard. His ears buzzed. He felt anger rising within him, but at the same time, he remained cold and focused. The phone rang. Instinctively, Ross answered without looking at the screen. "Hey, sweetheart. Are you back yet?" The man's voice on the other end was low and calm. "This isn't Phoebe," Ross replied, his voice steady, almost threatening. "Adam, right?" Silence. Then the call disconnected. The next morning, Phoebe returned home looking flawless. Her hair was neatly tied up, her clothes revealed nothing. She dropped her bag on the couch and smiled. "How was your evening, honey?" Ross looked at her, trying to gauge if she realized he knew. "Fine," he said shortly. "And yours?" Phoebe hesitated slightly. Her eyes flickered downward for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "It was good. The kids were calm. I helped with dinner. Then we watched a movie." "And you left your phone at home," Ross said, standing up from his chair. For a brief moment, something like fear flashed in her eyes, but she quickly masked it. "Oh, really? I didn't even notice." "I answered your call," he added, watching her reaction closely. "Adam says hello." Her smile vanished. She started to say something but stopped. Ross stepped closer, his gaze serious. "What's going on, Phoebe?" "Nothing," she answered quietly. "I'm not stupid," he continued. "What are you hiding?" Phoebe lowered her head, but her voice remained firm. "You brought our marriage to this point," she said. "You're always at work. Adam appreciates me in a way you haven't for a long time." Ross took a step back, as if her words had physically struck him. "And that justifies your betrayal?" he asked. Phoebe looked him straight in the eyes but said nothing. Now he knew the truth. But this was only the beginning of the game. Ross sat in his car outside Adam's house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He had never been impulsive, but this time, his anger demanded action. He had seen Phoebe enter the house a few minutes ago, not looking back, not hesitating, as if she was home. His heart pounded wildly as he stepped out of the car. He walked up to the entrance, ready to explode, but just as he reached for the doorbell, the door suddenly opened. Standing there wasn't Phoebe, but a young woman, one of Adam's employees, apparently, holding a baby in her arms. "Are you Ross?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, slightly taken aback. "How do you know me?" "Adam said you might show up." Her voice was calm, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. "He asked you to wait for him in his office." Ross felt his anger boil even more. Adam was expecting him? Was this a trap or something else? He stepped inside, following the woman through the spacious hallway, filled with expensive furniture. Everything here screamed wealth and power, and Ross had the overwhelming urge to destroy it all. "Is Phoebe here?" he asked, but the woman only shrugged, gesturing toward the office door. "He'll be with you shortly," she added before quickly disappearing with the baby. Ross entered the office, where everything was perfectly arranged. Books on the shelves, a heavy wooden desk, a large monitor. He stopped in the middle of the room, trying to steady his breathing, but then something on the desk caught his eye. A photograph. Phoebe was in it. She was smiling, holding one of Adam's children. This wasn't just a regular employee photo. The moment was too intimate, the expression on her face too genuine. A cold fear spread through Ross's chest. The office door opened, and Adam walked in. Tall, confident, with a slight smirk that managed to be both friendly and condescending at the same time. "Ross, glad you stopped by," he began, as if they were old acquaintances. "Where's Phoebe?" Ross asked sharply, ignoring the greeting. Adam walked over to the desk, picked up the photograph, and studied it. "A beautiful shot, isn't it? She's so natural with the kids. They adore her." "Don't play games with me." Ross's voice trembled with anger. "What's going on between you two?" Adam set the photo back on the desk and met Ross's gaze directly. "Between us? I imagine you've already drawn your own conclusions, Ross. But let me ask you something. Why do you think this is my fault at all?" The words threw Ross off. "What do you mean? Do you really believe Phoebe is looking for something new because of me?" Adam stepped closer, his voice cold. "This is all because of you. You left her behind for too long, and I simply filled the emptiness you created. You're using her." Ross shouted, stepping forward. Adam raised a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Is that what you think? Maybe you should hear it from her." The office door opened again, and Phoebe stepped inside. Her face was pale, but her expression was resolute. "Phoebe, tell him," Adam said quietly, taking a seat behind his desk. Ross turned to her. "What did he tell you? What are you doing here, Phoebe?" She took a deep breath, avoiding his gaze. "Ross, I thought you'd change, but nothing did. I had no choice." "You always have a choice." Ross interrupted her. "You could have talked to me, told me you were unhappy." "I tried," she snapped, her voice trembling. "But you were always too busy." "Adam, he listened to me. He understood me. He's manipulating you, Phoebe." Ross stepped toward her, but she stepped back. "No, Ross, you pushed me away." Her voice was quiet now. "And now it's too late to fix anything." "Why?" Ross felt his heart stop. Phoebe turned away, but Adam answered for her. "Because she's pregnant, Ross. And it's not your child." The words hit like a thunderclap. Ross froze, unable to speak. "That's not true," he finally whispered, staring at Phoebe. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I wanted to tell you earlier, but I didn't know how." Ross couldn't hear another word. He turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. His world seemed to shatter into pieces, but a plan had already begun to form in his mind. Ross sat in his car on the side of the road, his mind consumed by chaos. Adam's words echoed in his head. "She's pregnant, and it's not your child." He couldn't believe this was real. It had to be a joke, a deception. But Phoebe's expression, filled with guilt and fear, left no doubt. He pulled up in front of a small cafe where he and Phoebe used to spend a lot of time together. Now, this place felt like a ghost from his past life. Ross walked in, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window, staring at his own reflection in the glass. He had to figure out what to do next. His phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. You don't have the whole truth. If you want to know more, come to the park at 9 p.m. Ross froze. He read the text again. What was this? A joke? A manipulation? But if there was even a chance to learn more about the situation that was tearing him apart, he couldn't ignore it. At 9 p.m., Ross stood at the designated spot in the park. The air was cool, and the only light came from the street lamps, casting long shadows on the empty benches. Time dragged on unbearably, and he was starting to think this was some cruel game when suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. "Are you Ross?" a quiet voice asked. The woman was wearing a hood, her face mostly hidden. "Who are you?" he replied, eyeing her warily. She glanced around as if checking to see if anyone was watching her. Then she pulled back her hood. Ross recognized her. It was the young woman who worked in Adam's house. "You know something about what's going on?" he asked quickly. "Yes." She sat down on a bench, motioning for him to do the same. "But you have to promise you won't tell anyone about this conversation." "I don't have time for games," Ross snapped. "What do you know?" She sighed. "Adam isn't who he seems to be. He has a lot of secrets, and your wife is just a part of his game." "Game?" Ross raised an eyebrow. "He uses people," she continued, looking down at the ground. "He knows how to manipulate. Phoebe, she thinks this is love, but in reality, it's a trap." "A trap? What do you mean?" Ross leaned in closer, his voice tense. She looked him straight in the eyes. "Have you ever wondered why Adam chose your wife specifically?" Ross was caught off guard by the question. "What are you trying to say?" "He knew about you," she said quietly. "He knew about your life, your work, even your weaknesses." Ross felt a tight knot form in his stomach. How does he know all that? "He has his sources." She took a deep breath. "He has powerful friends who tell him the information he needs. You're not a coincidence, Ross. You're part of his plan." Ross clenched his fists. "What plan? What does he want?" "To destroy you," she said plainly. "He needs you just as much as he needs your wife." Her words hit Ross like a thunderclap. Rage boiled inside him. "Why? What did I ever do to him?" "I don't know all the details, but it has something to do with your job." She looked at him with pity. "All I know is that he wasn't acting alone. And Phoebe, she got caught in the middle without even realizing she was being used." Ross stood up, unable to listen any longer. "This is insane." "Ross," she stopped him, standing up as well. "If you want to protect her, you have to act fast. Adam won't just let her go." He didn't respond, just nodded and walked away, leaving the woman standing in the dark. Back home, Ross started analyzing everything he had learned. His career as a lawyer involved complex cases, sometimes against very powerful people. But why would someone choose to get revenge like this? And could this even be true? One thought circled in his mind. He had to find out. Tomorrow, he would go to Adam. But this time, he would be ready. By morning, Ross woke up with a clear decision. He couldn't let this go. But before confronting Adam, he needed more evidence. He went through the cases he had worked on in the past few years, searching for any connection to this man. And then, suddenly, something caught his eye. The Mark Langton case. Last year, Ross had successfully defended one of the former partners of this businessman from a serious financial lawsuit. Mark had lost millions, and his reputation had taken a severe hit. And now, as Ross thought about it, Mark could very well be the person seeking revenge. His phone vibrated, interrupting his thoughts. A message from Phoebe. "We need to talk. It's important." Ross stared at the screen for a long time before dialing her number. "Phoebe." His voice was tense. "And what do you want to say?" "We can't keep going like this," she replied, her voice trembling. "Do you need to understand that I never wanted things to end this way?" "End?" he repeated with a bitter laugh. "Are you saying this is the end?" "Ross, please." Her voice was almost pleading. "Just meet me. We need to talk in person." "Fine," he answered shortly. "Where and when?" "At Rosewood Cafe, in an hour." When the call ended, Ross felt the anger and contempt boiling inside him. But he had to stay composed. He arrived at the cafe a few minutes before the scheduled time and took a seat in the corner, where he had a clear view of the entrance. A few minutes later, Phoebe appeared. She looked lost and tense, and as she sat down across from him, she avoided his gaze. What do you want to say?" Ross asked directly, wasting no time on formalities. She lifted her eyes, filled with pain. "I don't know how to fix this, Ross. You're the one who has to fix it." His voice was cold. "You destroyed everything." Phoebe sighed, covering her face with her hands. "It wasn't that simple. I got confused." "Confused?" Ross leaned forward sharply. "Do you let yourself get dragged into this? And now you're pregnant." Her face flinched, but she didn't deny it. "Ross," she said softly, "I'm afraid you don't understand who you're dealing with. You're the one who should be afraid." He cut her off harshly. "But tell me, who am I dealing with? What do you know about Adam?" Phoebe hesitated, looking like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, she whispered, "It's not just about me. He has plans for you." "Plans?" Ross narrowed his eyes. "Do you realize how that sounds?" "Yes," she replied, holding his gaze. "But it's the truth. Adam knows everything about your cases, about the people you worked with. He's using me as a tool, but his real target is you." Ross remained silent, processing what he had just heard. "And you let him do it?" His voice trembled with anger. "I didn't know," she answered, tears welling in her eyes. "At first, it seemed innocent. He just needed help with the kids. But then things changed, and I realized he knew more about us than he should. And you still stayed." His words hit like blows. Phoebe leaned in closer, her voice urgent. "You don't understand, Ross. It was either play by his rules or lose everything." "Everything?" Ross laughed bitterly. "And what did you have to lose?" Phoebe looked at him with pain in her eyes. "You." Those words stopped him. He looked at her, trying to determine if she was being sincere. But instead of responding, he simply nodded, stood up, and walked away. As he stepped outside, his phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number. "Found something interesting. Come to the same place in the park at 10 p.m. This could change everything." This time, he didn't hesitate. He needed answers, and he was willing to take the risk to get them. Ross pulled up to the same park. He checked the time. 9:55 p.m. 5 minutes until the meeting. His heart was pounding, not from fear or anger this time, but from tense anticipation. He couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would be a turning point. Darkness had fully settled over the park, with only the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows. Ross walked toward the same bench where he had met the girl before. From a distance, he saw a silhouette, but this time, it was someone else. "Ross?" came a man's voice. He stepped closer and saw a middle-aged man with graying temples and a scar on his right cheek. Dressed in a dark coat, he looked like he had walked out of a spy novel. "Who are you?" Ross asked sharply. "Someone who can help you." The man gestured for him to sit. "I don't believe in games," Ross shot back, but sat down next to him. "If you have something to say it straight." The man nodded and pulled an envelope from his coat. "Adam is just the tip of the iceberg. His job is to distract you, to trap you. But he's not the real threat." "Distract me from what?" Ross cut in, his suspicion growing. "From what's happening behind your back." The man looked at him seriously. "You have an enemy, a powerful one. Someone you crossed during your career has decided to destroy you. Adam is just a means to an end." Ross felt a chill run down his spine. "And who is this enemy?" "Mark Langton." The man handed him the envelope. Ross quickly opened it and pulled out several photographs. They showed Adam and Mark sitting in a restaurant, talking. Another photograph captured Adam, handing Langton a folder. "They're working together?" Ross asked, studying the images closely. "Mark lost everything because of you," the man explained. "His money, his reputation. But he doesn't just want to ruin you. He wants you to suffer." Ross clenched the photos in his hands, his jaw tightening. "How do I stop this?" "You need to act fast." The man stood up. "Find what Mark and Adam are trying to hide. They're close to their goal, but they haven't finished yet. What exactly do they want?" Ross stood up as well. The man looked at him seriously. "They want to make you lose everything. Your career, your family, your freedom. And then they'll strike where it hurts the most." "What do you mean?" Ross's voice trembled with tension. The man hesitated, as if debating whether to say more. Phoebe, she's part of their game, but she doesn't even realize it. And the child? He paused for a moment. Are you sure it's not yours? Ross froze. What are you implying? Adam likes control. He could have said anything to break you. Maybe you should find out for yourself before believing his words. Ross felt his heartbeat quicken. How do I find out? That's up to you. The man turned to leave. But remember, time is not on your side. Ross stood in the darkness, holding the photos, feeling the ground beneath him becoming less and less stable. Back home, he reviewed the photographs again, searching for details that could reveal more. His thoughts were chaotic. If this child was truly his, everything changed. But if Adam was manipulating even this, he picked up his phone and dialed his old friend, a detective. Tom, I need your help, he said when the call connected. What's going on, Ross? Tom asked, a hint of concern in his voice. I need a DNA test, and find out everything you can about Adam Warren. Consider it done, Tom replied shortly. Ross ended the call and closed his eyes. One question echoed in his mind. If this really was his child, could he forgive Phoebe? But if not, how far was he willing to go to uncover the truth? Ross was still holding his phone when another message arrived. Don't waste time. Some secrets can't stay buried forever. He didn't know who it was from, but something about the words made his heart tighten. Everything was becoming more tangled, but he was determined to untangle it. Suddenly, his phone rang. Tom's number flashed on the screen. Ross answered immediately. What did you find? He asked, skipping any pleasantries. Adam Warren is an interesting person, Tom replied. His real name is Adam Langton. Ross felt his blood turn cold. Langton? Is he related to Mark Langton? They're brothers, Tom confirmed. Adam changed his last name a few years ago after the scandal when his brother lost the company, probably to avoid association. But he was involved in some deals with Mark. That makes sense, Ross whispered. They're working together to destroy me. And that's not all, Tom continued. Adam has a long history of using women to manipulate powerful men. Some of them filed lawsuits, but the cases were quickly closed. He has connections. Connections? What kind? Politicians, lawyers, businessmen. He's an expert at setting people up, exploiting their weaknesses, and then taking them down. Ross gripped his phone so tightly it nearly cracked. Tom, I need a DNA test. As soon as possible. Of course, Tom replied. I already found a lab that can do it. But there's one problem. We need samples from both parties. I'll handle it, Ross said shortly and ended the call. His mind was racing. If Adam was really Mark's brother, that explained a lot. But why Phoebe? Why was she part of their plan? He returned home to find the kitchen light on. Opening the door, he heard the soft sound of running water. Phoebe stood at the sink, her back to him. And we need to talk, he said, stepping inside. Phoebe turned sharply, her eyes filled with fear. About what? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The truth. He moved closer. Who is Adam, really? She looked away but remained silent. Did you know he's Mark Langton's brother? His voice grew sharper. Phoebe flinched. I didn't know at first, she whispered. He didn't tell me. And when did you find out? Ross pressed. A week ago, she admitted, lowering her head. And you didn't tell me? Ross's anger flared. You let them manipulate you. Let them drag you into this game. I was scared, she shouted back. Scared they would destroy us. They already have. His words were like gunshots. But this isn't over. Phoebe suddenly fell silent, her face turning pale. What do you mean? Ross stepped so close she could hear his heavy breathing. We're doing a DNA test, he said, his voice quiet but firm. And if this child isn't mine, I will destroy Adam. She took a step back, her eyes filling with tears. Ross, and not now, he cut her off. Tomorrow, I'll find a way to get the samples. Then we'll know the truth. Phoebe said nothing, just nodded in surrender. The next day, Ross went to Adam's house. He watched as Adam stepped out of his car, talking on the phone. Ross knew he had to move fast. He walked over to the trash bin near the house, spotting a coffee cup Adam had just thrown away. This should work, he thought. slipping the cup into his bag. He handed the sample to Tom the same day. The wait for results was unbearable. But 2 days later, Tom called. "Ross, we have the results," he said cautiously. "Canned?" Ross asked, holding his breath. "It's your child," Tom answered. The words hit him like lightning. Adam's entire plan now seemed even more sinister. They wanted him to doubt himself, to doubt Phoebe, to doubt his entire life. But now, he knew the truth. Ross ended the call and realized their game was over. Now it was his turn to play. Ross was sitting in his office, twirling a pin in his hands, when he heard a knock on the door. It was late, and he wasn't expecting anyone. He stood up, opened the door, and froze. A woman he had never seen before stood before him. She was dressed in a simple black dress, her hair neatly pulled back, and she held a small briefcase in her hand. "Are you Ross?" she asked calmly. "Yes. And who are you?" "My name is Emma. I need to talk to you." "It's about Adam." Her voice was steady, but there was urgency in it. Ross gestured for her to come in. Emma quickly scanned the room before sitting down on a chair by the desk. "Who are you, and what do you know about Adam?" he asked, taking a seat across from her. Emma held his gaze for a moment. "I was his wife," she said, and the words hit like thunder. His wife. Ross couldn't hide his surprise. "Ex-wife," she clarified. "I know what's happening between him, you, and your wife. And I came to help you." Ross leaned forward, his eyes locked on her. "And why should I trust you?" Emma opened her briefcase and pulled out several documents. "Because I know what he's capable of. And if you don't stop him now, he'll destroy you just like he did to me." Ross took the documents and started flipping through them. They were lawsuits, statements where Emma testified about Adam's financial fraud and emotional abuse. "Why are you here now?" he asked, still reading. "Because he never stops," she replied. "He plays the long game. Everything that's happening now is part of his plan. And I know how he thinks." "What exactly does he want?" Ross tossed the papers onto the desk. Emma hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to say it. "He wants to ruin you to fulfill Mark's goal," she explained. "But there's more. Adam always plays personal games. He wants your wife for himself." "He's already made moves in that direction," Ross said coldly. But she realized she was part of his trap. Emma gave a small smile. "You think you know everything? Adam doesn't let go of his players that easily. If your wife is still in his orbit, that means he's preparing his next move." "And what could that be?" Emma pulled out another document. "This is his list of contacts, people he's used for his schemes. Some of them are judges, lawyers, even politicians. He has records on every one of them, and if you want to beat him, you need to find those records." Ross took a deep breath, realizing just how serious the situation was. "And you know where to find them?" "He has a secret office," Emma said. "That's where he keeps everything. But you'll have to move fast. If he finds out I'm helping you, he'll get suspicious." "Why are you doing this?" Ross looked her straight in the eyes. "Because he took everything from me." Her voice was cold, but there was pain in it. "And I won't let it happen to you." "Fine," Ross said, standing up. "We'll find this office. But if this is a trap—" "It's not a trap," she interrupted. "You have no other choice." Emma handed him an address and stood up. "If you need my help, I'll be in touch. But remember, time is against you." She left, leaving Ross with the feeling that everything had just gotten even more complicated. But now he knew that his enemy was stronger than he had seemed. The next morning, Ross prepared himself. He took a hidden camera and the documents Emma had given him. When he arrived at the address, it was an old office building. Inside, it was quiet and dark. His heart pounded as he approached the door Emma had said led to Adam's office. Opening it, he stepped inside and saw a room full of files, computers, and papers. But the worst part came when he heard footsteps behind him. Ross turned around and saw Adam standing in the doorway, a cold smile on his face. "You think you've outplayed me?" Adam asked, his voice calm but menacing. "I'm not playing," Ross replied, trying to keep his composure. "You have no idea how deep this goes," Adam said, stepping closer. "But I'm glad you're here. It makes things easier." Ross realized this wasn't over. It was just another trap, but he wasn't backing down. Adam stood in the middle of the room, watching Ross with the confidence of someone who had already won. His smile was as cold as the room filled with evidence of his manipulations. "You think I didn't know you'd come here?" Adam asked smoothly, stepping even closer. "Maybe you were expecting me," Ross answered, keeping his tone steady. "But you underestimated how far I'm willing to go." Adam chuckled, low and controlled. "You really believe you can change the outcome of this game?" He shook his head. "I'm always one step ahead." Ross quickly turned to the desk, scanning the documents. The files that could be the key to bringing Adam down were right in front of him. "I'm taking these," Ross said, grabbing the nearest folder. Adam took another step forward, his voice turning icy. "You don't know what you're doing. If you take those documents, everything you have will disappear." "Is that a threat?" Ross shot back, glaring at Adam. Adam smirked. "It's a fact." They stood locked in a stare down when suddenly, the door behind Adam opened. Phoebe stepped into the room, freezing when she saw Ross. Her eyes flicked to Adam, searching for reassurance. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "You tell me," Ross said, turning to her. "Why are you here, Phoebe?" She opened her mouth but hesitated, her gaze darting to Adam. "Tell him," Adam said, folding his arms. "I came." Phoebe took a step forward. "I came to talk to him." "Talk?" Ross let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. "You think I'm that naive?" Phoebe faltered, but Adam cut in. "She didn't come here to talk, Ross," he said, sounding almost amused. "She came because we agreed to continue what we already started." The words hit Ross like a cold wind. "What do you mean?" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Adam stepped even closer. "This isn't the first time we've met behind your back, and it won't be the last." "That's not true," Phoebe suddenly cried out, but her face betrayed doubt. "You've been silent this whole time," Ross snapped. "And now you expect me to believe you?" Phoebe burst into tears, but Ross ignored her. His focus was on Adam. "You want to take my life?" Ross said, slowly stepping toward him. "You want to destroy my family? Fine. But you have no idea what I'm capable of in return." Adam didn't answer. He just smiled. Ross abruptly turned and walked out, the folder clutched in his hand. Phoebe ran after him, but he didn't stop. The next few days, Ross spent meticulously planning his revenge. He combed through every document he had taken from Adam's office and found several weak spots. Mark and Adam weren't just brothers. They had a shared business built on fraud. These documents could not only destroy Adam but also drag Mark into a criminal case. Ross also uncovered more of Adam's manipulations with other women. He compiled all the evidence and began distributing it through influential channels, trusted journalists, and law enforcement. But he wasn't stopping there. "Are you sure about this?" Tom asked as Ross laid out his plan. "Absolutely," Ross replied. "They wanted to destroy me. Now I'll show them what a real downfall looks like." A week later, news of Mark and Adam's financial fraud hit the headlines of all major publications. The police launched an investigation, and their partners and investors began pulling their money out. Adam tried to contact Phoebe, but she avoided him. Ross allowed her to stay at home, but now there was a cold wall between them. "Why haven't you kicked me out?" she asked one evening, standing in the doorway of his office. "Because I want you to see how this ends," he replied without taking his eyes off the computer. The next day, Ross received a message from Emma. "They lost everything. You won." Ross smiled. It was a bitter, but well-earned victory. His life had changed forever, but now he was in control. Adam and Mark were left with nothing. Their world, built on lies, had crumbled. And Ross? He had learned his lesson and decided that he would never again let anyone manipulate his life. As Ross approached his office, he tried to keep his gaze steady. "Yes, we have new evidence," said a voice on the other end of the line. "We need to act quickly, Ross. We can't wait." "Don't worry," Ross replied, his voice calm, but his eyes burned with determination. "I'm already here. Just a few more steps left." He entered Kleefinger's office, where the documents that could seal his victory were already waiting. All of Adam and Mark's frauds were now becoming public, and nothing could save them. But there was still one crucial thing left. Ross felt that he wasn't here just for revenge. His phone rang, and Ross glanced at the screen. It was Phoebe. How are you? Her voice sounded tired, but there was that same mixture of hope and regret that always accompanied her words. I'm fine, Ross answered, feeling his heart clench at her voice. And you? Have you seen the consequences of your actions? Ross, I know I made a mistake. I never wanted to betray you. I was weak, and Phoebe began to cry, but her tears didn't touch Ross's heart. I know you won't forgive me, but I want to try to make things right. We can be together. Please. He held the phone away from his ear for a few seconds, thinking, remembering everything that had happened, every moment of pain and betrayal. Finally, he answered, Phoebe, everything has changed. I'm not the same person anymore. You're not mine anymore. With a quick motion, he put the phone back in his pocket and returned to the task he had yet to finish. The next day, during a meeting with Kleefinger, Ross was suddenly surprised by a woman he had only seen a few times before. It was Laura, the journalist working on the article about the brothers' financial schemes. What do you want from us? He asked, watching her serious expression. I want you to understand, Laura said, smiling as if she was ready for something bigger. I'm not just here to investigate this. I want to help, and not just because of my job. Ross paused. He thought for a moment. Her voice was calm, and her eyes were confident. This was a woman who knew what she wanted. Aren't you afraid of diving into these dark waters? He asked, knowing how risky the whole situation was. Laura met his gaze and nodded. That's exactly why I'm here, she replied. Their conversation lasted a few more minutes, and the more he spoke with her, the more he felt that someone new, someone right, was beginning to fill the emptiness in his heart. When he returned home, Phoebe was already there, waiting for him. You don't understand, do you? She stepped closer, her voice trembling. I can't let you go. I've changed. We can start over. Phoebe, you haven't changed. You're still playing your games, Ross said, his voice firm, and I don't want to be part of them anymore. I found something real. Her eyes filled with tears, but he didn't let himself feel pity. You're leaving, Phoebe. This is the end. Phoebe couldn't say another word. She left, and Ross remained, but now with a new sense of hope. Sometimes, true revenge isn't about destroying or punishing someone. It's about understanding who you are and what you truly deserve. Laura was waiting for him beyond this world, and he knew this was only the beginning of a new path. Do you think Ross could have forgiven Phoebe if she had sincerely repented from the start, or was his revenge already inevitable?